This is Beowulf Part 3 Text Notes Screencast. We're going to pick up with the fight with Grendel's mother. In the end of the last screencast, we talked about Beowulf kind of being called one last time to help avenge the Danes, and how Hrothgar was like, "Hey, I need you one last time here. I need you to go avenge the death of my most beloved man, and I need you to do this for us." And so, Beowulf is never one to kind of turn down a task or a challenge, especially, that whole, we talked about the Virgil, we've talked about it multiple times now. You should gather that it's kind of important to this time period. But pledging your allegiance to the warrior, that whole idea of commitatus, and the symbiotic relationship between the Lord and the warrior, and then also how important it was for them to settle these debts when someone is slain. And so Beowulf obviously is going to rise to the challenge to go seek out this she bee. So he takes his men and he rides to the moors, which is kind of like a swampy uh, land, out in very wild, very overgrown. And he comes to what is called a mere. So it's like a lake or a pond, and he brings with him some men. He brings some of Hrothgar's men, and he brings his own men. And this mere is no ordinary, lake. It's swarming with sea monsters and sea beasts, snakes, all kinds of things that are there. And so the men, obviously, they're a little afraid of this new place. And so Beowulf knows that he's going to have to swim to the bottom of this mere in order to locate the she-devil. So he decks himself out in his war gear. He has an ancient sword that has never failed in battle. It's called runting here. It's an iron blade. It was when it was forged, it was tempered in blood, and it's never failed anyone who's ever hefted it in battle, even no matter what they face. And so he feels pretty confident. So he dives into the waters and he begins his journey to the underground, the lair of the she beast. And so he says that, or the story says that he swam for half a day. So we know, we talked about the fictional elements and the historical elements, kind of the mesh here, but he swims underwater for a day. Um, to the bottom of the mere to get to the she beast. And so she is underneath, the one who haunted the water. She sensed that a human was swimming down, obviously, and so she swims to attack him, catching him in her brutal grip. But Beowulf's chainmail is so tightly linked together that it saves him from getting her talons from going through. Um, and so instead, she drags him to her underwater cave where all of her little cronies, her little sea beasts, attack him with tusks and tear at his chainmail, and they tusks and teeth and all kinds of stuff, trying to attack him for their master, who is Grendel's mom. It's probably best here to point out that it's very dark in there. Beowulf can't see anything. He's getting attacked from all sides by all these creatures that he can't see. But he catches like a momentary glimpse of firelight, and he seizes his chance. So he hefts his sword, okay, and so he brings it down with all of all of his strength. He brings it down on her head, but the shining blade refused to bite. It spared her and failed the man in his need. So for the first time, this weapon that had never failed anybody in battle, has failed him. But remember, we saw this with the battle with Grendel, that no weapon forged by human hands can defeat them. These monsters, they're undefeatable with man-made weapons. Beowulf refuses to lose heart, right? He flings down his failure of a sword and decides to take the same approach that he took with Grendel. I mean, it worked before, why fix it if it's not broken? So he grabs her by the shoulder, but she's a lot faster than Grendel is. She topples him to the ground. She pounces on him. She attempts to stab him with a little short blade. But again, the chainmail saves him from being stabbed to death there, and he thanks Holy God for that. Right? Thank the Lord. Um, and so he gets back up on his feet. So he spies over in the corner of her armory in this underground cave, he spies a sword that was an ancient heirloom from the days of the giants that is so large that only Beowulf, a man of his size, Beowulf would be able to pick it up, even it's so large and heavy. So he grabs it up and he swings a resolute blow that bit deep into her neck bone and severed it entirely, toppling the doomed house of her flesh. She fell to the floor. The sword dripped, and the swordsman was elated. So she falls down dead. So Beowulf is really happy at this point, obviously. He is starting to make his way out of the underwater cave when he spies the body of Grendel, and he knows, that Grendel's head, returning it back to Hrothgar, would be the best trophy that he could provide. So for Larks, he kind of cuts it off with the iron sword. So, meanwhile, up on the banks, the king, his men, they're waiting Beowulf's return, and the water. They're watching. He's been gone forever. A lot of them have started to kind of give up, because he's been gone now for 9 hours, and he is hasn't come back yet. So they witness the water begin to surge and bubble and turn bloody and all this stuff, and so immediately they jump to the worst case scenario is that Beowulf is dead and he's not going to return, and so they bow their heads, they say nice things about him, and so they abandon their posts and start to go home. Only Beowulf's men, his men, remain there on the shore. So under the waves, Beowulf's sword, the giant sword that he was using, the metal actually part begins to melt away, right? Like ice melts. And all that is left is the head or the hilt of the sword that's embossed with jewels or whatever. And so he's going to bring that along with him back to the surface. Scares the heck out of his men. He comes up out of the water, and they all. Skip back to Harrowit with Grendel's head in tow. It takes a bunch of men to carry the head because it's so heavy, that kind of thing. And they have another party. You guessed it. So all the people are happy, they're free. Hrothgar tries to persuade Beowulf to stick around, but he is eager to go back home. He's eager for his men to get back home to where they belong. They give a bunch of gifts, and Beowulf and his men return to Gateland. So back home, he receives a hero's welcome. His lord gives him some land of his own, a hall of his own, some wealth, and time passes, right? So Hygelac, Beowulf's king, dies, and uh, there's been quite a bit of time that has passed to this point, and so Beowulf is chosen as the next successor to his own throne, and he rules it well. 50 years, he grows old and wise, until, unbeknownst to Beowulf and his kingdom, close by, deep under the earth, there's a great dragon that sleeps over a pile of treasure, and he's been there for nearly 3 centuries. And the story goes that dragons, and unless they're disturbed, they will sleep for centuries without without, becoming active. So he's kind of dormant underneath there until one day, a servant was running away from his master. His master was angry and he was seeking refuge away from his angry master. And so he stumbles upon this lair and he gets in there, he goes down into the vaults and he sees all this treasure and he's like, you know what would make my master less angry? Let me take some of this treasure and give it to him and that'll make him really content. And so he picks up a golden gem studded goblet and he leaves the hoard. Okay? Tracks back to his house, gives it to his master, yada yada yada. So Dragon, he wakes up because he realizes that some of his treasure is missing. He sees the thief's footprints and bursts out of his lair, hot and savage, with pent up fury to seek out the trespasser who has troubled his sleep. And so he follows the footprints back to the village, the town, and yeah, he's angry. So he literally begins to belch out flames and burn bright homesteads and leaving nothing alive in his wake. So he wreaks havoc, and then when everything's burned down to ash, he returns back to his den. Well, Beowulf wakes up, or wakes. He was awake. He was probably sleeping. I don't know. Anyway, Beowulf is given the news. His men come to him and they say, "Okay, I got some news for you. Your whole town is burnt to the ground, including your own home and your great hall." And the text says that it darkened his mood. It wasn't he was angry; it just darkened his mood. And so he knows that it darkened his mood. I love that. Um, so Beowulf knows that something has to be done, and true to his form, he decides that he's the one that needs to take care of it. So he orders an all iron shield to be constructed. Obviously, wood is no match for fire, so he knows that his shield needs to be iron, and so but this is like kind of the bone of contention with Beowulf. Many times that we've seen him go into battle, he has gone alone, and which some people are kind of divided. Does that make him a good leader, or does that make him because he's trying to protect his men, or does that make him foolish because so many things could have turned out differently if he had just asked for a little help? But he's too proud, right? And the text says that it says that the Prince of Rings was too proud to line up with a large army against the Sky Plague. He had scant regard for the dragon as a threat, no dread at all of its courage or strength, for he had kept going often in the past through perils and ordeals of every sort after he had purged Hrothgar's hall, triumphed in Harrowit, and beaten Grendel. And so he's like, look, I've done this before. Like I've beaten all these men and all these monsters and I've had so many successes. I don't need anybody else, right? Um, I've survived many other dangers and won countless battles. All I need is myself and a good, nice iron shield, right, to beat off the flames. And so at the beginning of this next section, lines 25, 10. Let me scroll down there. 25, 10. Okay, so they march out to where the barrow is, and Beowulf has got his men right there on the hillside, and he's like, listen, and he's going to make one last boast. This is the last formal boast of his life. He says, I risked my life often when I was young. Now I'm old, but as king of the people, I shall pursue this fight for the glory of winning. If the evil one will only abandon his earth fort and face me in the open. Then he addresses his companions one last time, And he says, he continues on. He says, I'm going to go forth in a mail shirt and shield. I won't shift a foot. And when I meet the cave guard, what occurs on the wall between the two of us will turn out as fate. Overseer of men decides. I'm resolved. And then he tells his men, he says, remain here on the barrow, safe in your armor, to see which one of us is better in the end at bearing wounds in a deadly fray. The fight is not yours, nor is it up to any man except me to measure his strength against the monster or to prove his worth. So he's like, you guys stay here on the side. I'm going to go in, I'm going to take care of business, and I shall win the gold, or else fate is going to decide that it's time